The night was heavy with a strange kind of electricity, the sort that seemed to seep through the walls and settle in the corners of every room. Across the world, financial chat rooms flickered with half-baked theories and hurried screenshots. At first, it felt like nothing unusual, just another wave of speculation, another rumor about the Iraqi dinar that would rise, flare, and disappear like so many before it. But this time, something was different. The tone of the messages was urgent, almost frantic, as if the writers themselves could barely keep up with what they were seeing. Ahmed sat in his modest living room, the glow of his laptop casting long shadows on the faded wallpaper. For years he had held onto his dinar, a quiet decision made in defiance of those who mocked him. It's worthless paper, they had told him. You'll never see a return. But Ahmed had believed otherwise, drawn by the whispers of a revaluation, the promise of a reset, the hope that one day his patience would prove them all wrong. Tonight, as the clock struck midnight, his heart raced in a way it hadn't in years. Something in the air told him that the story he had been waiting for was about to unfold. Then it happened. His phone vibrated violently against the table, the screen lighting up with a bold notification. Iraqi dinar policy shift announced, immediate impact expected. For a moment he thought it was a mistake, maybe even a scam, but when he opened the news app, the words stared back at him in stark black and white. Official, confirmed, the government of Iraq had made a move that no one could ignore. Ahmed's hands trembled as he clicked through live coverage. On one channel, a financial analyst was speaking faster than usual, his voice clipped and urgent. "This isn't speculation anymore," he said, his eyes wide with something between fear and excitement. "We are witnessing a monumental shift in Iraq's currency policy. If you own dinar, everything has changed as of this moment." On another channel, the banner at the bottom screamed, "Breaking, dinar Sheh. Cup what this means for global markets." The sheer intensity of the coverage told Ahmed that this was not like the countless false alarms he had endured in the past. This was real. He stood up, pacing the room, every muscle in his body alive with nervous energy. Memories rushed back of every conversation he had ever had about the dinar. His brother's laughter when he bought his first bundle. His friends' dismissive shakes of the head whenever the subject came up. Even the cashier at the currency exchange who had smirked when he counted out the notes. All of them had doubted, and for years Ahmed had carried that doubt quietly, questioning himself in the stillness of sleepless nights. But tonight, as the world seemed to tilt on its axis, he felt something inside him ignite, a mixture of vindication and sheer terror. Outside his window, the city seemed eerily calm, unaware of the storm brewing in digital spaces, but Ahmed knew better. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Across oceans and borders, countless others like him were staring at their screens, their breaths caught in their throats, their futures hanging on the words of politicians and bankers thousands of miles away. A shared silence stretched across continents, the kind of silence that only comes before history writes itself. He refreshed his laptop again, and the feed exploded with updates, screenshots of government press releases, translations of official statements, voice notes from people claiming to be insiders. The words repeated over and over. Policy shift, immediate effect, prepare. In chat rooms, some were already celebrating, convinced this was the long-awaited revaluation. Others were panicking, warning of traps and sudden devaluations. The arguments were loud, chaotic, but underneath them all was the same truth: something had changed forever. Ahmed sat back down, pressing his palms against his knees to steady himself. His breath came in short, uneven bursts. He glanced at the drawer beside him, where his dinar notes were tucked away in an envelope. He had kept them safe for years, hidden from prying eyes, guarded against ridicule. Now they felt like a key to a door that had just swung open, but the question remained, where did that door lead? Toward riches or ruin? The television filled the room with the noise of commentators trying to make sense of the announcement. Some spoke of opportunity, of Iraq entering a new phase of stability, of global partnerships and recognition. Others warned of volatility, of markets collapsing under the weight of sudden change. Ahmed could barely absorb their words. They clashed against each other in his head like clanging bells. What he felt more strongly than anything else was the raw pulse of uncertainty, a countdown ticking louder with every passing second. It was strange how the ordinary details of the night still intruded on the extraordinary. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional bark of a dog outside, the faint rattle of a motorcycle passing on the street below. They seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of monumental news. Ahmed's heart pounded so loudly that he could barely hear these sounds, but he noticed them all the same, as if his senses had been sharpened to capture every detail of this night. He thought of his family asleep in the next room, unaware of what was happening. He wondered what he would tell them in the morning. Would he wake them now, share the news, risk sounding foolish if it turned out to be another false alarm? Or would he wait until the dust settled, until the picture became clearer? The decision weighed heavily, but before he could make it, another alert flashed across his phone. Central banks preparing statements on Iraq's currency changes. That was it. The confirmation he needed. This wasn't rumor, this wasn't speculation, this was real, and it was moving faster than anyone had anticipated. Ahmed's pulse quickened, his mind racing ahead to possibilities, new rates, new exchanges, new wealth, or new risks. Every path was wide open, every outcome possible. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a fog that both promised treasure and threatened destruction. The night stretched on, the minutes dragging like hours, but Ahmed couldn't tear himself away from the screen. He knew that when dawn came, the world would be different, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever held a piece of Iraqi dinar in their hands. The silence of his living room now felt like the calm before a storm that was about to engulf millions. He leaned back, eyes wide, heart pounding, waiting for the next update to drop, knowing that time was no longer on his side. The night had barely shifted into dawn when the world began to tremble, not from earthquakes or storms, but from the pounding hearts of countless investors watching their screens. The faint glow of early morning barely touched the streets, but in living rooms, kitchens, and office corners, the light of phones and laptops lit up faces filled with anxiety and hope. Messages pinged relentlessly, one after the other, cascading through group chats, forums, and Telegram channels like sparks leaping across dry fields. Each message screamed urgency. Each voice seemed to carry the same warning: act fast before it's too late. Ahmed stared at his phone as if it were a lifeline. Notifications stacked in a blur, voice notes from people he had never met, but whose names had become familiar in late-night financial discussions. Links to supposed insider documents and bold claims that the rate had already shifted. His heart raced with each new update, his breath coming in uneven bursts. He didn't know what to believe, but the sheer volume of noise left little room for doubt that something monumental was happening. Elsewhere, in cities across the globe, people rushed into streets and lined up outside banks. Some wore rumpled clothes, as if they had come straight from their beds the moment the news broke. Others clutched envelopes filled with dinar, holding them close to their chests as if afraid someone might steal them. The air was thick with tension, with whispered calculations, with hurried debates about whether to wait or cash in immediately. The chaos was unlike anything Ahmed had ever seen before. He scrolled through live feeds showing footage of banks in Europe, with lines stretching around the block, people arguing heatedly about exchange rates and timelines. In the United States, small groups gathered outside currency exchanges, their eyes darting nervously as reporters shoved microphones in their faces. In Baghdad itself, the streets were filled with a strange combination of celebration and panic. Some waved flags, shouting that Iraq had finally stepped onto the world stage in strength. Others pushed desperately toward bank doors, afraid they might miss their one chance. Ahmed's own neighborhood felt quieter by comparison, but he knew it was only a matter of time. Already, a car idled outside his building longer than usual. A neighbor hurried past carrying a briefcase that bulged unnaturally. People who had never cared to talk about money suddenly glanced at him differently, as if sensing he carried secrets. The dinar, once mocked as little more than colorful paper, had become the most valuable possession many could imagine. His phone buzzed again with a message from an old friend he hadn't spoken to in years. "Bro, I heard you had dinner. Cash out now, don't wait. They're saying the window will close." Another message contradicted it. "Hold, rates are climbing by the hour. This is just the start." The conflicting voices swirled in Ahmed's head like a storm. His hands shook as he poured himself a glass of water, spilling half of it on the counter. Every second felt like a countdown, every decision weighed like a matter of life or death. The television blared in the background. Anchors spoke in rushed tones, their eyes wide with something close to disbelief. Words like historic, unprecedented, and volatile flashed across the screen in bold letters. Economists argued on split screens, their voices overlapping. One shouted about stability and opportunity. Another warned of manipulation and collapse. The clash of opinions only deepened the uncertainty. For Ahmed, it was like standing in the middle of a storm where every gust of wind pushed him in a different direction. Outside, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the street. Ahmed peeked through the curtain and saw a small group gathered near the corner store, talking in frantic tones, holding slips of paper that looked suspiciously like currency receipts. The panic had spread here, too. It was no longer something distant he was watching online. It was tangible, alive, pressing against the walls of his own city. He sat back down, clutching his phone. His dinar envelope lay on the table, silent but heavy with meaning. Should he take it to the bank immediately? What if the rate jumped higher in a few hours? What if the window closed in minutes? His chest tightened at the thought of losing everything, of being so close to the reward after years of patience, only to miss it by hesitation. At the same time, greed whispered in his ear, urging him to wait, to gamble on a bigger payout. The weight of choice was suffocating. In the group chats, arguments escalated into shouting matches, voices breaking with desperation. Some posted screenshots of supposed receipts showing shocking exchange rates, proof that their patience had paid off. Others accused them of lying, of stirring panic. A few fell silent altogether, vanishing from the chat rooms, perhaps too busy at the banks to post any more. The digital noise was deafening, yet Ahmed couldn't look away. He imagined the scenes unfolding in banks around the world. Clerks overwhelmed by demand, their faces strained as they tried to keep order. People pushing, shouting, demanding answers. Families holding hands as they stepped forward together, clutching their hopes in the form of paper bills. Security guards trying to manage the swelling lines, their radios crackling with tension. In every corner of the globe, the same emotions played out: fear, greed, excitement, doubt. It was chaos, pure and unfiltered, but chaos driven by hope. Ahmed pressed his palms against his temples, trying to quiet his racing thoughts. The voice of one commentator on the television broke through the noise. Time is of the essence. Those who act quickly could secure life. Changing outcomes. Delay may mean losing everything. The words struck him like a hammer. His stomach twisted, and he felt beads of sweat forming on his forehead. It wasn't just money at stake. It was his future, his pride, his years of belief that everyone else had mocked. As dawn finally broke, sunlight spilling across his living room floor, the pressure only grew heavier. The city was awake now, fully alive with the hum of conversations and hurried footsteps. Somewhere in the distance, he heard a car honk 3 times in quick succession, followed by voices shouting excitedly. The world around him was no longer calm, no longer indifferent. It was caught up in the same fever that gripped his heart. Ahmed knew he couldn't sit idle much longer. Every second was a decision. Every hesitation could mean a loss. Yet his mind was split in two, one side urging him to grab his envelope and run to the bank, the other whispering that the real reward lay in waiting, that patience might still deliver him more than he dared to dream. The sound of his heartbeat filled the silence between news alerts, each thud reminding him that the clock was ticking and the window might already be closing. The world was moving, and Ahmed was caught in its current, powerless to resist. The choice would define him. Whether he acted now or later, the outcome was no longer in his control. The Iraqi dinar had shifted from rumor to reality, from speculation to history, and he, like millions of others, stood trembling at the edge of destiny, knowing that everything he had waited for was unfolding before his very eyes. The midday sun bore down on the city, casting long shadows across crowded sidewalks and bank entrances that now looked more like stages where history was unfolding. The air was thick with heat and tension, buzzing with voices raised in disbelief, excitement, and anger. News anchors on large screens mounted in shop windows struggled to keep pace with the unfolding chaos, their words nearly drowned out by the sounds of car horns, hurried footsteps, and overlapping conversations. For Ahmed, every sound seemed amplified, every movement around him charged with meaning, because in his hand he carried the thin slip of paper that had changed everything. The receipt crinkled softly as his grip tightened, his sweaty palms threatening to smudge the ink. He had finally made the decision. He had walked to the bank, joined the endless line, endured hours of restless shuffling forward, and handed over the envelope that had weighed so heavily on him for years. The dinar, once dismissed by friends and strangers as little more than worthless bills, had now become his key to a new life. But as he stepped out into the blinding sunlight, he found himself unable to fully process what had happened. The numbers on the receipt didn't just represent money. They represented vindication, proof that he had been right to believe when no one else did. Around him, the atmosphere was electric. A woman clutched her own receipt and sobbed openly, collapsing into the arms of her husband, who lifted her off her feet in celebration. A young man who had clearly come straight from work, still wearing his uniform, held his slip up to the sky and shouted, his voice breaking with joy. Others moved silently, their faces pale with shock, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were holding was real. Strangers embraced one another, united by a shared experience that had erased the lines between them. Ahmed watched it all unfold, his own emotions tangled in a knot he couldn't yet untangle. Relief coursed through him, relief that the years of waiting hadn't been wasted, relief that he hadn't let doubt force him to give up. Yet at the same time, fear lingered. Had he acted too soon, would the rate climb higher tomorrow, leaving him with regret? The questions gnawed at the edges of his joy, whispering that the moment he had dreamed of might still be incomplete. Television crews appeared on the streets, cameras swiveling to capture the raw humanity of the moment. Reporters shoved microphones toward anyone willing to speak, their voices trembling with the awareness that they were recording history. "How does it feel?" one asked an older man whose hands shook as he held up his receipt. "Like I've been given back the years I lost," the man replied, tears streaking down his cheeks. His words carried through the crowd, and others nodded, echoing his sentiment in murmured agreement. Ahmed turned his gaze upward. The sky was clear, a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds, but it felt heavy nonetheless, as if even the heavens were watching. The sunlight reflected off windows, making the city gleam brighter than usual, and in that moment, he felt as though the whole world had tilted, shifting into a new era. It wasn't just about the dinar anymore. It was about possibility, about doors that had suddenly opened where walls once stood. As he walked down the street, he overheard snippets of conversations. Some people talked of paying off debts, of finally lifting the crushing weight that had haunted them for years. Others dreamed aloud of starting businesses, of traveling the world, of giving their children the opportunities they had been denied. The air was thick with plans, with visions of futures suddenly rewritten in the span of hours. For once, hope was not a distant fantasy. It was tangible, printed on small slips of paper that people clutched like treasures, yet not everyone celebrated. In the corner of a side street, Ahmed noticed a man sitting on the curb, his head buried in his hands. His envelope of dinar still lay unopened at his feet. He had waited too long, doubting until the last moment, and now the bank had closed its doors temporarily under the weight of overwhelming demand. The man's shoulders shook with silent sobs, his cries drowned out by the jubilant chaos surrounding him. The sight struck Ahmed deeply, reminding him of the thin line that separated fortune from regret. Timing, more than belief, had made the difference. He clutched his own receipt tighter, a wave of gratitude washing over him. Still, questions lingered. What would happen tomorrow? Would governments impose new rules, limit exchanges, alter rates? Would those who celebrated today wake up to disappointment in the morning? The uncertainty remained, but for now, it was drowned out by the raw energy of the present moment. The sound of church bells rang out unexpectedly, followed by the distant call to prayer, as if faith itself was woven into the day's events. People paused for a moment, their voices softening, their movements slowing, before resuming with renewed vigor. Ahmed felt a strange sense of unity, as if the entire city, perhaps even the entire world, had been bound together by a single, shared heartbeat. He stopped in front of a cafe, its outdoor tables crowded with people comparing receipts, sharing stories, and speculating about what came next. The air was filled with laughter, nervous and uncertain but real nonetheless. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different life. A home of his own, free from the burden of rent, a small business that could grow into something lasting. Security for his children, opportunities that once felt impossible. The images played in his mind like scenes from a film, each one more vivid than the last. As the afternoon wore on, the initial frenzy began to settle into something quieter, more reflective. People still crowded the streets, but the shouts of joy gave way to softer conversations, to the hum of voices processing what had just happened. Ahmed found a quiet bench and sat down, staring at the numbers on his receipt again and again, as though expecting them to change with each glance. The paper felt fragile, but the promise it carried was enormous. He thought back to the countless nights of doubt, of scrolling through forums at 3 in the morning, of defending his decision to those who dismissed him as a fool. Those memories seemed distant now, fading in the brilliance of the present. He had endured the weight, borne the ridicule, and held onto his belief. Now, as the sun began its slow descent and the city pulsed with a new rhythm, he realized he had crossed a threshold. The Iraqi Dinar had redefined not just his finances, but his entire sense of possibility. He looked around at the faces of strangers smiling, crying, stunned, and knew that every one of them would carry this day with them forever. Some would remember it as the moment they gained everything, others as the day they lost their chance. But no one would forget it. Ahmed stood up, his legs trembling but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. He tucked the receipt carefully into his wallet, taking a deep breath as if to anchor himself in the moment. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time he welcomed that uncertainty with open arms. Everything had changed, and as he stepped into the golden light of the fading day, he knew there was no turning back.